Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Finally.
My first Discord call. So is this sounding okay?
Oh yeah, it sounds fine.
Great.
I figure. Have you never done a call over Discord before?
No, because we do podcasts over Skype because we're weirdos who still use Skype for some reason.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's funny.
And I've
Yeah.
done a couple Slack ones and a few other ones, but Zoom, but never actually Discord. So
Oh, okay, that's funny. I did the first two over Zoom because Terry and Greg, they're like, older and like professionals and all that, and I was like, but Zoom is like kind of a pain to use a little bit for me. So I was like, I think I can get away with Discord with Molly.
yeah. I'm one of those people who like I've been on the internet for a long time. So I'm into all the weird kind of internet things where yeah, I know a lot of people. Like my boss is a Zoom person.
Yeah.
And like we don't do the video. So it's
Mhm.
like, we don't have to use Zoom to do this. There's like a lot of other
Yeah.
ways to do it, but whatever.
Did you use TeamSpeak back in the day?
Uh, but I mean, because we used like, let's see, I mean, because I was using like ICQ for like text-based stuff, and then I'm trying to think of what we started using for voice. I don't know if you ever used TeamSpeak. Because I did. I would do like Xbox stuff with my friends, and we used the voice chat on there.
Yeah.
But then yeah, like I just for some reason we moved to Skype for a lot of things, and now it's one of those kind of curses where I've got like two people that I still have to talk to that won't move to anything else
Yeah.
on Skype, so I can't not have Skype open all the time. But it's just like just move to something else,
Yeah.
please. At this point,
Yeah, I've
so
got that with some apps. But
yeah.
yeah. Well, it's really nice to meet you. You were one of the most vital sources of information when I was
Yeah,
making
I got
the
kind of big mouth
Dicard.
on this game fan stuff.
Yeah. I
Yeah, like I don't know like how much you got into it because I know it was really funny. Because back in the day there was a site called Fat Babies. Did you check out any of the Fat Baby stuff?
Oh, was that a forum or
No. So Fat Babies was kind of like this. God, what would you like a tabloid for like video game stuff? And
I'm remembering I think I visited it for like one thing.
yeah, and I mean I think they're long since gone, but like
Yeah, some
for
archive.
some reason, I think I don't know what point it was at, but for some reason, something of mine, I think is how it started, like got put up on Fat Babies, like
Hmm.
saying something trashing Dave, and then Dave saw it and Dave replied through Fat Babies, and then like I replied to Dave through Fat Babies, and so there was just this back and forth through this like kind of like scandal, video game scandal site about the game fan stuff.
That's
Um,
funny. Was that there was a point where he went on some forum and started advertising something and you got like really mad at him
It
and
might have been yes,
you
yes, and I know that because yeah, he literally came onto a forum he was never on
it
normally
was
and
called
advertised
Game
the stuff.
Go. Yeah.
Yeah, because Game Go was Eric Malone's started that after GameFan died,
Yes.
and he basically talked. And I can't remember the name of the store now, but it was kind of in the earlier days of like online video game stores, and he talked this guy who had a game store into like putting a lot of his money into making this magazine. And I was going to start in issue two, and the magazine literally lasted one issue.
Oh.
The first issue hit shelves, and unfortunately, they were planning on the money coming in from that first issue to print the second issue, which you can never ever do.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out, and like all these copies didn't sell. And so the second issue got finished, but they never got out there. And so Game Go, I'm trying to from memory, Game Go then becomes the TNL forum, and the TNL forum is where that really gigantic thread comes in
Okay.
later that
And that
you probably read through.
I think I did. Yeah. That and that magazine that was ECM tried to start that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it was ECM, and I got his name was Thomas something or other, and I can't remember his name, but that was basically he was trying to get a new magazine off the ground, and it was like super hyper Japanesey kind of magazine, like even more
Uh-huh.
so than Game Fan was, which was funny because ECM did not necessarily like all the kind of the that kind of stuff at that point. But yeah, so he tried to get them to he tried to get with somebody else to launch a new magazine, which was Game Go, and then that's the forum that Dave came on to
Mhm.
advertise. I think it made him in Play actually. Funny enough that I worked with for Play later, but
Yeah.
I think it was Play when he came on,
Yeah, he
and then
was
I yelled at
advertising
Dave,
Play.
and then I think Fat Babies picked that up, and that's kind of where the back and forth ended up coming out publicly.
Okay, yeah. I think he was advertising Play. I looked through my notes last
Yeah.
night getting ready for this. I was like, "Oh yeah, this weird little before you worked at Play and then later went on to work there."
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said, because I mean, I loved my time at Game Fan, but it was also crazy, and I was like a younger person there,
Mhm.
so it was a really weird experience for me. So, I've always had fun talking about it, and then also I've had like two public spats with Dave,
Yeah.
that had gotten out there, and then I was the person who started that big thread that got archived with all the Game Fan editors kind of coming in and talking about their stories. So,
Yeah. Well, uh with that said, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to start asking just kind of like from the beginning of the story, I guess.
sure, yeah.
So, how did you end up joining GameFan? Because you were on like the kind of like second wave of talent who came on, sort of.
I would actually say I was like a third wave of talent.
Okay.
And I'll go through this as quick as I can because there's a little bit of backstory for me.
Uh-huh.
So in elementary school, I had a chance to have a computer at home, which I know sounds very quaint now, but like that wasn't a thing a lot when I was a kid,
Yeah.
having computers. And so I had one, and I would make little like video game newsletters for myself because I was a really big fan of video game magazines. From when they first started kind of coming out, I was really into them, and I wanted to do my own, and so I just make like this one sheet kind of thing. And then in junior high, my mom gets a job at a place called Kinko's Copies, which nowadays, if you know what a FedEx office is, they bought Kinko's and turned them into FedEx offices.
Oh,
So it was
okay.
kind of a place that you would go in and you could either make copies for yourself, or you could pay a little bit extra to have the people who work there make them for you. And
Yeah.
again, that sounds a thing that's kind of not as much existent anymore
I
with how digital.
I think I grew up by one. I think we had to use
Yeah,
one. I don't know when they changed over to when they got bought out, but I think I did grow up in one. So they were maybe or at least throughout the 2000s.
yeah, yeah. So like the idea of, I mean, there's gonna be people, young people out there who are like, wait, you just go in and like make copies, and that was a thing that you could have a store for?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom got a job there, and I would go with her sometimes and just kind of hang out a little bit while she was working. And they had kind of these rental Macs, like the old school Macintoshes that you could use. And if nobody was using them, I would get onto them and kind of learn writing and design and layout and things like that. And from there, I started my own video game fanzine in junior high. I go on to high school, and like a lot of teenagers, I decide I need to rebel against society and find my voice, and bring the man down and stuff like that. And so I get with some friends, and we make a a quote unquote underground art and literature fanzine called Honor Students on Acid. So they aren't as big as now, but it used to be a thing. They are still around sometimes. It used to be a thing where parents would have a bumper sticker on their car saying like, my child an honor student at such and such school,
Oh yeah,
or
yeah.
and so it was a take on that as like, my child an honor student on acid, kind of like the kids that have gone wrong or something was kind of the idea. And so we did like, you know poetry and writing and art, and like, yeah, man, this is how our school's wrong, this is how society is wrong, and stuff like that. And it was kind of just an outlet for us as teenagers to kind of get out our feelings and have that source. But there was a point where there was a music and bookstore downtown in my hometown that was kind of a more like alternative scene kind of place that a lot of kids would go and hang out in and look for books and music and stuff. And so we would take issues of HSOA, as we called it, down there and drop them off down there for free. And I had taken a stack down there one day, and while I'm there browsing the music, I hear in the background somebody like, "Oh my God, the new issue of HSOA is here. You know, this is so awesome." And it was like, there's somebody actually reading my stuff that I'm making. And then this is kind of so cool. You know, I mean, for you or anybody else, it's kind of like that day that you put up a YouTube video and all of a sudden, instead of getting like 2 or 3 views, you're getting like 100 or 200, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, wow, somebody actually cares about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that was like super exciting. And so that kind of got into me, like, I want to do something with this going forward. So, excuse me, I get out of high school. I actually end up getting a job at Kinko's myself, and I'm working the weekend graveyard shift. So, you know, like 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. Friday through Sunday. And there would be times when like absolutely nobody would come in and I'd have all my work done. And so what I would do is I would use that time to make my own video game fanzines again. I started back into that, and I could print them for free because I could get away with that. I knew how to kind of steal those copies, you know. And I did that. It got kind of popular. It got the attention of somebody from a company called Viz Media, who they're still around. They do anime and manga and stuff like that. And they were going to do their own video game magazine. But it was going to be a video game magazine kind of more tied into the anime and manga side of gaming. So, for example, they had a like a Samurai Showdown manga that they ran some pages of every month in the magazine. They had a Street Fighter manga that they ran some of that in there, and they also did other kind of coverage, reviews and previews and stuff. So I worked with them a little bit freelance-wise, and that got me up to a point where, while I was a fan of Game Fan, the one and only issue they ever had where in the back of the magazine they had an ad saying, "We're looking for new writers." And so I was like, you know, I wonder if I could do this. And so I put together a packet. I put together copies of my fanzines, a few writing samples that I had done. I had at one point, there was a point where in EGM, Electronic Game Monthly, they had a section of EGM 2, which was a separate kind of sister publication. They had a section for reviewing, or not necessarily reviewing, but covering fanzines. So what they would do is if they said, "Hey, if you make a fanzine, send yours in. We'll put it in here and we'll kind of review it, but more kind of promote it for you." And there was an issue where they actually included Game Fan. They actually included Game Fan, calling it a fanzine, kind of like insulting Game Fan because there was a Game Fan EGM rift. And they did that. And me being the quote unquote diehard Game Fan, you know, I sent him a letter like, "How dare you trash Game Fan," and stuff like that. And so I sent that in my package to Dave, thinking he would like that. So I sent him this package, and this would have been, I want to say, May or June of 1996. And then I get a call from Dave, and he's like, "Hey, I love your work. I love your fanzines. I love everything you've done. Would you want to come out and work for us?" And so I talked to him for a little bit. You know, he's like, "Hey, we'll move you out here to California, just hang out for a few months, then we'll bring you out here." And then I moved to California in August of that year. And my start with Game Fan was absolutely horrific. It was like a terrible first impression.
Where did you live
terrible first
before?
experience.
Where did you live before? Sorry?
I'm sorry?
Where did you live before? Where'd you move from?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's...
Yeah.
Was that like a big culture shock?
It was kind of, yeah, because like I had at that point I had not really done much traveling in my life, and I had certainly never been to LA.
Yeah.
And so I had just turned 21. So I was not like a kid because some of the staff members when they started they were I mean they were like 15,
They were
16.
illegally employed. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I was not that far down.
Yeah.
But I was still young enough that I really didn't know kind of what I was doing in life, and that it was a big experience to move from kind of Midwest to this big, gigantic, Los Angeles coastal town kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah. This in the 90s LA. That must have been crazy.
Well, so part of it was so I get there and somebody's supposed to pick me up from the airport and they don't.
Oh
And
no.
me being a complete idiot, I had the office phone number and I had the office address, and that's all I had. And this is like I want to say 7 o'clock on a Friday, and so I get into LA, and there's nobody there to pick me up, and I have no idea what to do, where to go, and
At
I call
night?
the office, and there's no answer, and so I'm like, oh man, and the only thing I could think to do was to find a hotel near the airport, and me not knowing Los Angeles
Oh no.
and not knowing the area around the airport, I didn't appreciate what kind of area that was. Sorry. So yeah, it was pretty sketchy back then. And
This is 7 at night, not in the
yeah,
morning.
yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, geez.
Seven at
Okay.
night, 7 at night, yeah.
Oh wow.
And so I basically spent the entire weekend in kind of this sketchy hotel. I'm sorry, not even a hotel, a motel, a sketchy motel near LAX, like wanting desperately to like get in contact with somebody at GameFan to find out what to do. And so it took me until Monday morning to finally talk to somebody and get them to bring me out to the offices.
Did you find out what happened to your ride?
So basically, so it was Ryan Lockhart was responsible for picking me up, who was
Okay.
Orion in the
Yeah.
magazine. Sorry, and I don't know if either he didn't know he was supposed to pick me up, or if he just forgot that he was supposed to pick me up.
Oh no.
But he basically came up to me like when I got to the office. He's like, "Oh yeah, sorry about that," and kind of just walked away.
Oh man.
But like I
Okay.
said, it was partly on me because I had no information. I had no phone numbers. I had no contact. I had nothing.
Jeez, Louise. Okay.
So I should have been more prepared going into there. But also, yeah, he just totally just flaked on me.
Yeah, they they probably should have given you a little more than
Yeah.
that. But so you said your start there was crazy. What was that? What was that like?
Well, so it was that part, and then I get in there, and um, so David only really talked to me over the phone and everything, and he knew me from my writing and stuff. But I was like a lot of young people, you kind of go through those phases where like you're trying to figure out who you are in life, and you maybe like go through different like fashion phases or looks phases and things like that. It's like I said, I had just turned 21 like a few months before that. So I was a young person, kind of looking like a young person in more what I would say like the alternative scene back then. And I think he wasn't expecting me to look how I looked. And he kind of just looked at me and panicked a little bit. And he's like, yeah, okay. And so we had kind of a weird conversation. And then he asked me to take a game and go play it for a while and write about it. And this is my first day there at GameFan. And for anybody who's done any writing, is sometimes it just takes you a while to kind of get into the swing of things. You need to get back into it and get your footing again and stuff. So I went and I played the game and I wrote a preview for it, and it was probably a terrible preview, because like I said, it was my first thing for GameFan. I didn't really know their voice yet. I didn't have anybody kind of talk to me about like what they were looking for and stuff. And he hated my preview. And like I made a few dumb mistakes. Like I think the game had like a kind of a neon kind of color scheme going on, and I wrote pastel instead of neon and a few things like that.
Hmm.
And so in a more professional situation, you would sit somebody down and say, okay, here's what you wrote. Here's what I think is good. Here's what I think is bad. Here's what I would change. Here's kind of what we would do more for our voice. But it was none of that. He just kind of like, oh, okay. And I found out later that he just hated my preview. So my first day, he hated how I looked. He hated how I wrote. And so that's where I kind of got pushed into the online stuff as well as the magazine stuff instead of being more focused on the magazine, where I got into doing all the like press release rewrites and stuff that you had talked about.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because the online portion, it's like a whole side story to the game fan business. And you were running that with Ryan Lockhart for a little bit, and then that
So
was
when I got there,
just
basically
you.
Ryan was running it. He was the only person doing it, and
Yeah.
I think in a way, he was really happy about how I ended up because then he had somebody to do it for me, but maybe do things for him and with him. But it literally was he I think was doing all this. So in our modern era, right? If a company sends us a press release, we usually don't just put it up on the website. We'll either, if it's worth anything, if it's got some good information, we'll take those details and write our own news story about it. But otherwise, we're just not going to do much with it. But back then, any press releases that came out, you would just throw them up on your website because there wasn't a lot of news that was being generated otherwise. And so a lot of sites were, here's news and here's press releases. And, nowadays in the modern era, all that stuff comes in via email or if for some reason you would get it faxed to you, you could always scan it in a scanner and OCR it or whatever. But back then, like these press releases would come in via fax, and then you would need somebody to literally sit there and retype the entire thing. And it's just like long nonsense, Los Angeles, California, blah, 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 blah kind of stuff. Yeah. And it was worthless content, really, if you weren't writing it into something else new. But for some reason back then, we felt like this stuff had to be on the site. So my first job was sitting there and just retyping this stuff. And it was awful. It was truly, truly awful. And it made me kind of just hate my job right away. And I hated it. And I hated being on the website. I never wanted to be on the website. I wanted to be in the magazine. And that kind of sent me down a path of just hating having to do like online stuff at that point. But yeah, it was a really, really little thing. And I think it was a point still when you really didn't know what a website was supposed to be for video game magazines, because there was still a lot of feeling of we can't just put up content from the mag because it'll cannibalize our sales of the issues. So it was still a lot of we just don't know what to do with it, which kind of led into me taking it over once Ryan, cause I think Ryan didn't want to be doing it either. And so once he talked Dave into getting doing more magazine stuff and then handing the site to me, it was just that same kind of feeling of like, okay, great, we have a site, but what do we even do with it?
So was there any kind of oversight from anyone like on the magazine? Like did Dave, or was there someone who was overseeing the direction of the website? Because
no,
you started doing the anime fan section. I was like, that seems kind of random to just spin off from the gaming website.
Yeah, no. I mean, and I'll tell you a quick funny story. I mean, it was to the point where, one day a little bit later on, I'm sorry, Nick, Nick DeBar, who's Nick Rocks in the magazine, he came up to me, and he's like, hey, yo, Shidoshi, we should totally show these like new bosses in Final Fantasy VII. And I hadn't played Final Fantasy VII. I didn't play the Japanese version or the American version. And I'm like, yeah, what's going on with them? He's like, yeah, in the American version, they're gonna have like new bosses in it. We should like totally show these on the website. So I'm like, all right, cool. Give me some screenshots, and then we'll write some text about it, and we'll do a story. And so he does, and so we put up the story, not thinking much about it, and be like, okay, yeah, here's the new bosses in FF7, you know. And I get in the next day, and I think it was Greg Rao was one of the few kind of adults in the room at GameFan. He comes up to me, and he's like, I don't know if we can cuss on here or not, but he's like,
Go ahead.
what the F did you do?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what? He's like, what the F did you do? What the F did you do? What did you put up on the site? And I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about, Greg. What did I do? And he's like, Sony called us and they are pissed. They are absolutely furious at us. And I guess what I had done was I had unintentionally leaked these brand new secret bosses in the American version of Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, it wasn't out in the US yet?
No, it was not in the US yet.
No.
Nobody knew about it. And I didn't know enough of the game to know that it was any kind of a big deal. It was just literally Nick had come to me and like, hey, we should do a story on this. I'm like, okay, cool. That's how it worked. There was no oversight, no real management, no kind of direction, nothing. It was if Dave or whoever happened to even look at the site and saw there was stuff up there, they were happy, you know. But other than that, there was nothing. And to the point where I think the only thing in watching your video that I think you got wrong, and it's not a big deal, but the switch from publishing news at 6 p.m. to doing it all day was under me when I was running it.
Oh, okay.
Because I was just like, well, if this stuff is done, why not put it up? But it was, you know, so I literally made that decision on my own and just did it and didn't ask anybody, didn't talk to anybody. I just did it. And that's kind of how things worked. Is at that point, they didn't care enough about the website to ever really need that oversight, which was on one hand kind of neat because then you could just do ridiculous things, which I did.
Uh-huh.
Like I would write about wrestling, or I would just write about like, you know, fan fiction about games or whatever. I would just do whatever I could think about on a certain day to write about. But there was no direction. And so it was literally whoever was running the site would just do what they wanted. And if that was a completely bad idea, no one was stepping in to say, sorry, that we should maybe do that, you know, maybe we should do something else better. There was none of that. It was at that point, most websites were just connected to magazines, and the magazines didn't want to erode their magazine readership. So there was little to no support from the magazine's side in terms of either republishing articles or getting new stuff, because they were all busy with the mag, and then the mag back then was the important thing.
Yeah. So I'm just because so it was you who decided to just put the news up when you guys got it. I don't know if that's, you know, I don't know all the facts on it, but from what I understand, GameFan Online might have been one of the first online publications to ever do that. To just put it up live.
I know gaming wise we absolutely were. I don't know otherwise.
Yeah.
But like if you think about it now, it's really such a weird idea that websites waited till X time of day. And for us, it was 6 p.m. Pacific time. Yeah. And go ahead, sorry. No, I was like, it's just weird, right? That
I think it just comes from like the people who ran because they were part of the magazines, and magazines, you know, there's like an established media news schedule. So like, you know, the evening news comes on, and it's always like 5 p.m. All the stories come out at 5 p.m. And I think when they made the transition to digital, or they kind of created those wings, they just ran it the same way because they never even thought to do anything differently.
I think it is that. It's like, yeah, you have like the 5 p.m. news, 6 p.m. news, or wherever you live, you know, like, and so you would say, okay, I'm going to go to GameFan at 6 p.m. to see the news. But that's like so
Yeah.
weird thought now. It's like
Yeah.
you have the internet, things can go up instantly. Why are you doing it in a way that makes absolutely no sense internet wise?
Yeah, because like what I just, and again, like maybe someone else did it before. I just think it would be really funny if GameFan and you inadvertently changed the way that like global news is distributed by putting up like cloud fan fiction, cloud diva fan fiction.
But it was just it was kind of one of those things where it didn't make sense until it did, right? And then and it's kind of like, wait a minute.
Then it's obvious.
Why am I? Yeah, it suddenly becomes obvious. It's like, this story's done. Why do I not just put it up and then we can tell people, if you come here all day, we're gonna have new stuff, and you never know when. So, it was a funny time just because.
Jesus, sorry, a bunch of stuff just slid off my desk. Go on.
It was just a funny time just because, now you think about how important a website is to a company, and back then it wasn't, and it was still so magazine focused, and it was just, as long as we have something up, that's good enough. And then we brought in some of the anime stuff, and I remember too, it was to my later horror, like right after I started GameFan was when kind of Shockwave Flash first came out.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything was, oh my God, we have to like remake our websites to be animating and buzzing and making noise and moving and stuff like that. And so it got to that really annoying time of when sites were just a complete mess to try to browse.
Okay. So when you were working on the website, were you in the offices at GameFan? How much proximity did you have to them?
Yeah, I was in the offices, and it was funny because, I think in the modern era, if I said to you, okay, there's a YouTuber, right, who gets millions of views per episode, or per video he puts up or she puts up, but this person is making their videos in a basement with just an old laptop and a microphone and a camera and whatever, you'd be like, yeah, okay, that's not surprising at this point. But back then, like, that kind of doing things at home, doing things on the cheap didn't exist. And so you have these kind of ideas of what you're going to see when you go to a company like GameFan. And when I got to GameFan, I was shocked at how just unprofessional and the technology was just completely out of date. Every computer they had was pieced together from random parts. The Macs they had were ancient. The place was like a big, just one giant like frat house. There was stuff on the walls everywhere and like carpet stains and stuff. And they had just rented out because it's kind of like office park in the suburbs, and there was a hodgepodge of whatever furniture they could find, and that's all they had. It was shocking to me walking into GameFan offices that those people could make a magazine, a professional magazine, every single month. And it was kind of like meeting your idol and just finding out they're a complete and total mess, and barely clinging to life and just can't handle every day. And it's like, these are the people, and this is the place that makes this magazine that I love. It was completely crazy. And I did work there in the office, and when I came in was, I believe, right after the MegaFan stuff had launched, which MegaFan was the separate like tips and strategy section of the magazine. So there was kind of two halves to the office. When you would go in, there was a little reception desk, and you'd walk upstairs, and then the left-hand side was kind of MegaFan, and right-hand side was GameFan. And so I was there in the office with everybody, and in the office and part of the office culture, because back then, of course, you would be. There was no working remotely, working from home, or anything like that. and so I got to see the game fan stuff right away from day one. But said it was shocking to me that and also because like I don't know how many people will fully understand this is it you had a couple people who felt like they were running things, and Dave certainly was not one of those people. Like a couple people who felt like they actually were in charge and trying to keep things going every day. And then you had a bunch of kids who loved video games and were there to play video games. And then you had some kind of mid-20s folks who loved games but also were just trying to get some money for a paycheck. And it was just complete chaos. It was awesome chaos. It was fun chaos, but it really was like if you watch a sitcom or whatever where it's like just this band of people who like each person's a unique character and a colorful personality, and they all somehow are coming together to do whatever they're trying to do. Like it really was that. It was not in any way a normal working environment. And it was crazy. It was awesome, but it was also just weird and terrifying and psychotic. So
do you have any fun stories from that time period?
I mean, like there would be fist fights. There would be people going up on the roof to smoke pot. There were of course the stories, the LSD and the coffee and everything. We had a few arcade machines in there and stuff. There were like dead rats in the cupboards and
What?
just like, yeah. I mean, it was. I don't know. Like it was it's
like
just
Animal House.
Yeah, it was, and yet somehow in the last few days you would get an issue put together, because you talked a little bit about it, about the kind of crunch stuff. And Dave, even in the play area, Dave was really bad about not getting things done till the last minute. And he was one of those people who thought that if he still had work, everyone should still have work.
Oh.
And so even if, I'm sorry, even if you had everything you had to do for the issue done, you still had to be there for crunch time. And inevitably, every month, the last 3 days, you would end up sleeping at the office because you would be expected to be there. Because what would happen would be Dave would have like 5 more games to review that he hadn't like touched yet, for example, right?
Jesus. And
so 48 hours before the issue's due with the printers, he would say, hey, I need somebody to play this game and review it. Hey, I need somebody to take this game and preview it, And so that's why you had to be around. And you also had to be around for moral support, his moral support, and to kind of like show you were a team player. So it was also, there was a fun time, but there were also the times that just sucked because for 3 days straight, you had to be there, even if you had nothing to do, but you also had to look like you were doing something. Because I think it was it the interview with Greg Off, where you were talking to him about like he got yelled at for like watching something that he was supposed to be watching for I swear you were talking to somebody about like how they got yelled at for doing something related to their job, and I would get yelled at for like watching anime when I was doing anime reviews. It was that kind of thing where like in that instant, if Dave decided you were doing something other than what he wanted you to be doing, he would get in trouble. And it's like,
yeah,
Dave, I'm literally watching anime to see if this is something worth reviewing for the magazine.
Yeah.
But so there were those moments of like it just absolutely sucking as a job.
It might have been the story about how Greg got fired when Jay Puryear told him the reasoning was that he was like playing, what was it? He was playing too much of a video game.
Yeah.
He was playing too much Need for Speed or something that he was reviewing, which was just like the excuse.
Yeah.
But,
it was something like that. It's like obviously if you work somewhere where your job is to play video games, you have to play the games you're doing for work, right? But there's also some amount of I'm playing these games because I need to know about games
Yeah.
and I need to have more information for what we might cover in the future. So it was that stupid sometimes of just if there was a point where Dave, it was usually Dave. It was sometimes Jay, but it was usually Dave of like if they just didn't like what you were doing at the time, even if it was completely related to Game Fan, you would get in trouble.
So then what was how did you feel about your place in the office as one of the, I guess, younger, maybe not like the youngest, but one of the younger members of staff? Because you described it as like the third wave. So was there like a social hierarchy, or was there? How did you kind of fit in there?
Yeah, so and it could have been third or fourth because I know right before I came in, there was kind of what we called the British invasion. There was suddenly this real interest in bringing over people who had worked at magazines over in the UK. So I just had the names, but I'm
One of them was probably Nightmare, I think.
yeah. So Nightmare was Dan Jevons, and he became a friend of mine. And then there was David Hodgson, who was Chief Hamilton, and there was Gary Herod was another one who he was more design work. But so before I came in, there was kind of the Brits came over, and then when I came in, I think the group that came in from that ad were myself, and then Mike Griffin, who was Glitched, and Mike Hobbs, who was Substance D. Which funny story, I actually still work with Mike Hobbs. And so we came in together. So there were these definitely kind of cliques inside Game Fan. So you had the kind of adults in the adult room that tried to make sure things worked and happened. And then you had groups like you had Nick and Casey Lowe and Ryan together because they were kind of the weebs as you would say now. And then so myself and then Mike Griffin and Mike Hobbs and Dan Jevons, we were all kind of coming in together, and we were all basically the exact same age range. So we were a group, and then you had some of the designers who were friends, so they were a group. And then you had the people doing the strategy guides, and so they were a group. So you did have these kind of different groups that you were in, and it could be hard at times because the four of us, since we were so new and so young, it was kind of hard to get a foothold in because you did have people like Nick and Casey and Ryan who had been there for much, much longer and who were much more well-known in the magazine, so they had their place. So like if I wanted to review a Japanese game, like it had to go through Nick not wanting it, Casey not wanting it, Ryan not wanting it, Dave not wanting it before it would come to me. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of hard. And so we were kind of the people who a lot of times got the games that nobody else wanted. And also those groups, once you get into the story of us racing to the bank, like that's how the groups broke up for the bank runs too. Oh. Is all those different little circles would be the ones, So if I called and I found out there was money, I would, and it was obvious, right? You had to make it not obvious. I had to think over to because Mike Hobbs had the car, because Mike Griffin and I didn't have cars, and Dan didn't have a car, so we had to go to Mike Hobbs and be like, "Yo, Mike, there's money in there. We need to go," And be like, "Oh yeah, we're going to lunch," and people were like, "They're going to lunch at 11:30. Something's up," So that's how the kind of those bank runs broke down too, was by those groups, and it was hard, and it wasn't until Dave leaves and half the staff leave and I decided to stay that to me really felt like I got my real chance in Game Fan, because that was the point when I got to do a lot more games that I legitimately wanted to do. I got to do more of the fighting games because now a lot of the fighting game people were gone. I got to do some of my own layouts. I got to do anime fan and stuff like that. So in those, I was there for 4 years, up until it died. And the first 2 years were harder for me because I was one of these newbies who was trying to get a foot in the door still, because there were so many people who were entrenched and just had seniority. And then the second 2 years of my time there were a lot better for me because I had my chance to actually do things I wanted to do.
And you were so you were doing both the website and the magazine at that point?
Yeah, and so I I'm trying to think. So I stopped doing the website. That would have been 98, I think. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's when they started switching it over. Because when I was there, I think it was 97. That's when Bryn Williams, another Brit, comes over, and then he and I do the website together. And I don't remember if because I in 98 I moved back to Nebraska just because, like, I just it was a lot of stress, and the money situation was still going on,
Yeah.
and Dave leaves, and a lot of staff leave, and on one hand I get a chance to do things I want to do, but on the other hand, a lot of people I considered to be friends were now gone, and there
Mm-hmm.
were new people coming in, and there were still the money issues, and it was getting weird just because David Bergstein, the people the guy who owns GameFan at that point, is obviously doing things with our money that aren't smart things.
Yeah.
And so I kind of decided that, like, I just didn't want to be in California anymore. I didn't want to be in the office anymore. So I moved back to Nebraska, and that's when I switched over to doing. I don't know if that's when I think I was doing Anime Fan before that, but then I focused on Anime Fan in the magazine. I was still doing some reviews and stuff, but then I was also doing the Anime Fan online at that point, but I wasn't doing Game Fan online at that point. And I think that's the point when kind of that later group comes in and kind of just totally revamps it, like you talked about.
Okay. Do you have any interesting stories from running a mid '90s website by the seat of your
Yeah,
pants?
it it was really different for me because I was doing the anime stuff more heavy than the games at that point, and that was the era when anime was really taking off in America.
Yeah.
Because I had gotten into anime back in junior high, and back then it was still this really unknown kind of thing. And if you went to a store, if they had anything, it was called like Japanimation, and they have a few tapes there. And that point is when it really gets big. And I would get boxes of like 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 tapes at a time, because this was before DVD. So this was back when you had to have a tape for the subtitled issues and a tape for the dubbed issues. I mean, the episodes, the tape for the subbed episodes and the dubbed episodes, and a tape would only have like 2 or 3 episodes. So like Evangelion would be like 20 tapes long or something like that. And so I was getting all this anime coming in and doing that stuff, and having fun doing that. And it was so I was, I don't know, like I was kind of just doing my thing and doing the site, and it was fun but I more still enjoyed the magazine side of it than the website of it.
Hmm.
But because I was disconnected from the office, it was just be by myself. So I was just kind of plugging away, and I think actually that's the point where I really started to kind of hate websites, just because I always liked the idea of the magazine where you have this set date that you're working towards, and you can put all your effort in to getting your stuff done for that point, and you have time to think about it and time to really work on it. and watch whatever you need to watch or play whatever you need to play. Whereas the site was every single day, right? You need something up today, something up today, some get 5 things today and 6 things tomorrow and stuff like that. And so I think that's kind of the point where the web stuff goes from being a lot of fun and just doing whatever you're going to do to that kind of every day you've got to have content going up and content going up, and it becomes this almost machine in a way.
Yeah.
That sites become, after that and during that era, where it's just a lot. It's just about churning out content versus doing things that are fun or interesting.
Yeah, it's like YouTube.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Like you start a YouTube channel and you're like, I'm gonna make a video when I feel like it and when I have a good idea, and then YouTube's like, nope, you're gonna do it every day or we're gonna punish you for it.
I went in the opposite way. I started out doing weekly videos and now I just do them monthly. That's when I force myself to have something out.
I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, I know that if you're trying to become a big person on YouTube, like that's not the way to do it, but it's so easy to just burn yourself out so badly in this stuff.
Oh yeah. I did that for like a year.
Yeah, and people always tell you like people are like do what you love, right? But then you do that and then you hate what you love and you have nothing to do when you're trying to escape your job. Like once your hobby becomes your job, your hobby is not that escape anymore.
Oh yeah. I would make a video in like 5 days during the week, and then over the weekend I would just be stressing out thinking about what the next video was going to be.
Right.
I had no free time.
Yeah, see, that was the nice thing about the magazine. And even now, like, because we still do the Walmart Game Center magazine. And even for that, there's this wonderful thing in print or things like that where you stress, get it done, and there's just those few days of just nothing, right?
Yeah.
And everything goes away, and you don't think about anything, and you're like, I'm not gonna think about anything until like 5 days from now, and then I'll worry.
That's exactly what I do.
De-stressing, yeah.
I make a video in like 3 weeks, and then I spend a week like painting Warhammer miniatures back.
Yeah, that's really the best way to do it, because that you need that little bit of like decompression time to not just seethe in having like I've got to make another damn video kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's way better. I there's definitely a parallel between the magazine thing and I guess what I do then.
That's why I'm so sad magazines are kind of like dying out. I like that not having to every single day think of something and do something, because when you get to that point, you're just making things to put something out there versus making things because you care about it.
Yeah. I think near the end of the documentary, I sort of lamented a little bit. I don't know if it ever made it into the script, but the shift to like websites it's really different from reading a magazine. It's really different because when you get a magazine, it's like this one thing, and it's like a complete package. It's a complete product, and it has an order that things are placed in, and there's visual design, and especially like with GameFan, this really intense like personality and visual style to it. And it felt like just reading those old issues that you guys put together, it's like it was cool. It was like a cool thing to read. And I remember being a kid and we used to get like Game Informer magazines. And whenever those would come in, I was like, oh, I would read through it and I'd reread it and I'd like go in, read things more closely. And it was like this whole experience. And like online, there's way more convenience, and that's obviously really nice, but it's because everything just comes out as like piecemeal, one at a time, little stories or videos or something like that. And it's, it's different. It's a little bit of a bummer.
Well, I think, and you kind of just hit on something that like I've seen is, and I don't know why the game Batman Arkham Knight like stands out to me, but I remember that game, there would like every other day, like PR would send out something about that game. You know, like here's one of the new moves Batman has in the game, and then a few days later, here's one of the enemies you're going to fight in the game, and a few days later, here's 3 new screenshots from the game, and we've really come into this world where, you know, the lead up to a game is just that, like little piece, little piece, little piece, little piece, over and over and over again, and everything's calculated and everything's thought about. Whereas back then, it was like, we might have one real chance to show you this game, so we're going to like blow it out and give you as much information as we can about it. And what was nice too is when you had that magazine, you know, when you got the Game Informer or the Game Fan or the EGM or whatever, is you would sit down and like just read through everything. And you would learn about games that you might not have learned about otherwise. Whereas now, with so much information out there and so many options, it's kind of like when you're sitting there with Netflix and you're like, I'm going to sit down and watch something. And then half hour later, you're still not watching anything because you haven't decided on what to watch.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're just like flipping through. It's like, it's so easy to pass up content and writing and previews or whatever now because there's so much of it. And so it's so easy to miss games that you might then not hear about otherwise. Whereas if you got an issue of a magazine, you would read through the entire thing because that's what was there and that's all you had for that moment. So there was something nice about like knowing that people were going to learn about and actually read what you wrote and put in the mag. And also on the making it side, it was nice to know that once it was done, like it was done. Like for good and for bad, you could never go back and change anything.
Yeah.
So, like, a YouTube video comes out, and then all of a sudden you see an update, something you covered. And you're like, you might be like, crap, I need to go in and then update that video to put in the new stuff because there's new information. Like, you can't do that with a magazine. There's something nice about that finality. And there's also something nice about having that physical thing in your hands that you've produced, right?
Yeah.
Like no matter how many articles you publish online, no matter how many YouTube videos you make, no matter how many podcasts you record, like sorry, there's not that just 2 weeks, 3 weeks after you've made it, you go to your mailbox and you open it up and there's copies of that issue. And you take it out and you're holding it in your hand and you're looking at this physical thing that your hard work has helped to bring to reality. And there's something really nice about that, you know.
Like your name's there, you're rereading it, what you wrote.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The other thing about that, I thought you were going to go in this direction, but you went in like the decision. It's called the decision paralysis with like the Netflix example. The other thing about like when you would look through the magazine is that nowadays so much of our like consumption and stuff is like algorithmically driven.
Yeah.
So you kind of just get steered towards stuff you already kind of like.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, reading those magazines as a kid, and like that's the first time I ever heard of like Yakuza. Back when there were only like 2 or maybe 3 games out. I don't remember like when exactly it started. And then years later, I see like Yakuza coming up again. I'm like, oh, like I didn't get into it because of the magazine, but just the name coming up, like I might have never even remembered that. I still remember, oh God, it was some like Suda 51 game, I think, that got like a really poor review, or it got like a 4 out of 10 review or something. And I still remember that game because in the article they said like the only funny joke in the game is there's a gun called the Big Boner.
That
Never was it Never Did?
Maybe.
No, it wasn't Never Did. It was Capcom.
I think it was Shadows of the Damned.
I think it was Shadows of the Damned.
Yeah.
You remember that too then?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like, it's still like in the back of my mind because I just ran into it randomly. Like I never would have run into that otherwise. And that stuff is fun. It's like it's very curated to tastes of the magazine and the people who are writing for it.
I think sorry. Um I think that's one of the real strengths that Game Fan was. And that's kind of one of the things that I took away from working at Game Fan was that there's a trend sometimes in games media to be like, here's why these games suck, right? Or here's why games suck, or here's
Yeah.
this why this company sucks. And there is a time and a place for that. But my our thing at Game Fan and my kind of thing past that has been like, how can I introduce games to people that they might miss otherwise? And that was a really big thing for Game Fan, was thinking about what are we putting in sorry. Thinking about what are we putting in, why are we putting it in there, and what's it gonna mean to the readers. And one of the aspects of that people either pick up on or don't was our screenshots. And I don't know that people know how much work went into those screenshots and getting them. It was a lot of work. Sorry, hang on one second. We would spend hours capturing screenshots for one game. And today, typically when you look at a website or look at a magazine or whatever, and you look at the screenshots for a game, 95% of those are screenshots they've gotten from PR for the company. And I can tell you that even when developers themselves are taking screenshots for their own game, like, a lot of them take very terrible shots, and they don't really think about the best way to show off their own creation.
Yeah.
At GameFan, we put so much effort into doing that, and it was a process that was crazy hard compared to how you can take screenshots from games now. But we put a lot of thought into that, and so if you go back and look at GameFan magazine, and I think the best time to see this is in any of our fighting game coverage. You will see in every single shot, typically we would show the characters doing moves and
Yeah.
doing something interesting and like really cool scenes, so that when you look at that game, you're like, man, this game looks awesome. So, we thought a lot about that. And on the writing side and on the visual side, we put a lot of effort into showing you why you should care about these games, and even if you aren't going to play them, like you said for Yakuza, at least know about them, so that later on, if you see that game again or see a sequel, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know that, and you'll kind of remember a little bit about why you should care about its existence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We went on like a real real tangent about magazines, just
Yeah,
in general.
well, I love them. I mean, I love. I will
Sure.
never not love magazines, even though it's a completely dying genre of media. But
Hmm.
like, I loved them as a kid, and that's why I got into them. That's why I worked at GameFan and Game Go and America. Oh God, what was Game On USA and Play and EGM and Walmart Game Center, and I've done some stuff for official PlayStation Magazine and stuff like that. It's a wonderful medium that is going away, but for those who remember it and those who were there for it and those who now look back on it, um, it was a fun time, and it was a great way to kind of introduce people to things that they might miss otherwise.
Uh, so before we leave, I guess the game fan era of of this story, I do want to ask you about the federal raid on the game fan offices.
So there were two.
There were two?
Well, there's two that I remember, and
Oh god.
so thinking about like what we're going to talk about on this talk, it's there's see the funny thing is, because there were so many people at Game Fan and there were these kind of divides in different sections and everything, it wasn't always easy to know why things were happening. But there were two big times when I remember the feds getting involved. And the first was because of Resident Evil 2, which
Yes.
is an amazing story. And the second was because one of the older and kind of more adult guys who worked there got fired. This is from memory. So if I'm telling the story wrong, I apologize to him. But he got fired, and he decided his parting gift to us would be reporting GameFan to the labor board and telling them that all these people, including young people, were working tons and tons of overtime and not getting paid for it. And so we had federal people of some level coming and talking to us for that too.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you mean the Resident Evil thing.
Yeah, but that's thank you for mentioning that one too.
So for anybody who's in the story, at this point it's a funny story. At that point it was not funny.
Yeah.
Companies would send us discs of like early builds of games, and this was still happening even when I was at Play. I remember when Persona 3 was coming out, for example, I got the review disc of that game like 3 months ahead of when it launched. So if I had wanted to, I could have done some unscrupulous things with it. But we would get a lot of games, especially preview builds and stuff, at the office. And at one point, we get some sort of build of Resident Evil 2. And I don't know if it was near final. I don't remember if it was review or what it was. But it comes in, and my understanding was it was Andrew Cockburn, who,
yes.
AKA the Inquirer, who did this. He had a friend, and I will never not find this funny. Is his friend's nickname was Bernie.
Yeah.
So Bernie was the guy who burned a copy of Resident Evil 2, and sometime between when we got our copy and the game coming out, a rep from Capcom is in some local game store in Los Angeles area, and he sees a copy of Resident Evil 2 being sold in the store. And he's like, wait a minute, this game isn't out yet. How do they have a copy of RE2? So he buys this burned copy of RE2, he or she, I don't know, take it back. And what they had done smartly was, for any copies they sent out, they had added some additional files on there to ID who had gotten that copy. And on the copy that he bought in that game store in Los Angeles was a file connecting to GameFan. So they knew we had done it. So then next thing we know, we come to work one day, and the office is shut down by the FBI, who's raiding us to find out what we're doing and if we're a big like game piracy ring or something like that. And it tarnished our reputation with Capcom at the very least for years. I remember, Capcom, when they sent games past that, they would send reps to come in and like watch us play the game to make sure we weren't doing anything with it. It was a completely stupid move, but like, you have to understand, it was just like, it was a lot of people who, a lot of young people who had little to no real guidance, right? There were no people there saying, not that you should have to do so, but, hey, we're getting these games in early from companies. We have to respect that they're doing that. Please don't burn copies and sell them to, to game stores locally.
Yeah.
There was just none of that real adult guidance in the office for most things. And it was crazy. And said, I wasn't somebody who had played RE2 or been in that circle of people playing RE2, so I didn't know until I get to work one day and we're shut down, and then learn why. But yeah, there was just tons of that kind of crazy stuff that would go on, But that was one of the biggest ones. That was like, oh my god, like the FBI are coming to look through our offices and stuff.
The Cap Cops showed up.
Yeah.
Were there any policy changes because of that, or did anything change because of the federal raid?
Not that I felt. I mean, it was obviously the conversation of, don't let this ever happen again, kind of thing,
Yeah.
But they said There was just no real. It really is amazing just how little oversight to most daily things. Like as long as the issues were getting done, like so many things were going on. I mean, like not this not at, on the level of game piracy, but like this was a point when already like you couldn't smoke indoors in California, and yet we had tons of people like smoking in their offices and stuff like that, and to the drug usage, the light let me say light drug usage,
Yeah.
going on in the office and things like so yeah, it was uh and you know, to a point that when Dave leaves and staff like raid his office later for the stuff he left behind and things like that, like it was at times just this anarchy free for all in that office.
So, speaking of, when Dave left, there was a couple years where he was doing Gamers Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say 3 years, and then he starts Play up in the 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
and you ended up working for Play.
Yeah. So I had gone. So Dave had kind of a meeting at his house, telling everybody what he was going to do with Games Republic and his mission and everything. And he brought a bunch of us to his house and was saying like, I want all you to come with me if you want to come, you know. And I had to make a decision, and I decided to not go. Partially because I just had never had the best of relationships with Dave. Like it got better over time, but never like super, super great. He wasn't somebody I really talked to very much and hung out with at all. And I did see the chance of like, if I say a game fan, I will have a better opportunity for doing the kind of stuff I wanted to do. So I stayed behind. I didn't go to Games Republic. And it was a funny situation because at the time I was roommates with Mike Griffin, and he did go over to Gamers Republic. So I was like, I had some of my friends who were over there, and I was still over at Game Fan. And then after that, it ends up that I end up moving to Japan to go to college a little bit after Game Fan shuts down. And while I was over there, something about that got me reconnected with Dave. So when Game Fan shut down, me and Dave had a big falling out. Like I was telling you before all this, online. And then we kind of patched things up a little bit, or just put it water under the bridge or whatever. And I was just kind of talking to him like, hey, Dave, I'm in Japan if there's anything you want. And so we were chatting back and forth. And then he was like, yeah, I'm going to be needing a new person on my website. Would you be interested? And what's funny is with Game Fan, with Play, and with EGM, all three, I've gone into all three wanting to work in the magazine and then getting stuck on the website, which has just tormented me the entire time.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I could. So I came in to Play in 2005, and it had been running for at least a few years at that point. I don't remember when exactly it started, but so I got in 2005, I think it was, and worked with them from here in Nebraska for a few years. Then finally, I think it was 2008, he convinces me to move back to LA to work on Play. I moved back in
From Japan?
mid to late 2008, and then like a year later, the magazine dies.
Oh, did you move from Japan? Were you still living there?
No, I had gone. I was back in the States at that point.
Okay.
So I was back in Nebraska, working there for a couple of years. I said it took him a few years to finally convince me to move to LA, like because he had been wanting me to move before that, but I was like, I don't know if I want to do it or not. But he finally convinced me. I moved back, and then like a year later, it's shut down. But I moved back to LA. I was running the website. I was doing writing and design for the magazine. And then I was also working on your favorite thing in the world, Girls of Gaming. So,
Yes.
yes.
I wanted to ask you about that.
And not only was I working on Girls of Gaming, I was in charge of making the digital issues and putting all the nudity into them. So
Oh,
that was my hand by which those images were added to them.
man, okay. I had some questions about play, but we could talk about Girls of Gaming
Yeah, we can do
first.
either one first. That's fine.
Just because you just brought it up, let's talk about GOG.
Yes.
So, um, the did you worked on the first issue?
No, I don't think so. I think the first issue came out because it's funny because I watched your Girls of Gaming episode
Yeah.
and it was weird to me because you're talking all these good things about Girls of Gaming and I'm like, that's not the magazine that I remember it being. I don't remember all this like good content in there.
Oh, in the first
So-
in the first issue.
Yes. So I
Okay.
think it was after the first issue that is around when I came in because I
Okay.
didn't do anything with that. But I did a little bit of writing for some of the later issues, I think, because I seem to remember writing. I think there was one issue that had like the girls from like Persona 3 or 4 in it. And I think I
okay.
wrote their text. So I did write a little bit of text. But the main thing I was doing at that point was I was also in charge of putting together the digital issues because we were selling those through Direct to Drive, which was like an IGN digital storefront. And so I would put the issues together at after they were done, they would give me all the files and then if there's anything needing to be added. And so what Dave would do was to incentivize people to buy the digital copies as well, is we would add additional content to those. And so that would be anything from extra art we'd been sent that we couldn't fit into the magazine itself to any of the R-rated content that he wanted in the issue that we couldn't put in the print version.
So, how much of Girls of Gaming how much of that was Dave's thing? And like that he was just
100%.
kind of. Well, sorry, what did it say that again?
I said 100%. Before you even
100%.
finish your question, but finish your question.
So you were just doing what he told you to do.
yes.
Okay, because, it's really funny putting it into perspective, especially when I did like the full reading all about all the game fan stuff before that, and how people talk about him. Because then you jump to Girls of Gaming, and he's really putting it all out there, like his personal preferences.
He's what I think the kids these days what we call like horny on main is what you would say. You know, yeah. He's definitely. And it was funny too because I remember you're kind of like puzzled when you're writing about his mention of critters.
Yeah.
Like, what's this critters thing? So yeah. Dave's two of Dave's big things were critters. Which for anybody who doesn't understand what that means, it's like kind of like the
it's furries. This is what I got.
Furry, okay, kind of yes, but also there was a really big trend back in the 16-bit era of having all these like animal mascot platformers. You know, it started with Sonic, and you had like Arrow the Acrobat and Kamikaze Squirrel and Gex and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he really likes critters, and he really likes boobies. You know, so we had those two appreciations would come out often in the play era.
Okay. Just so was that kind of like brazenness? Did he give that off in person, or was that just like, in his art?
I don't know how much I want to like actually say because I don't want to disparage the man too much in certain ways.
Okay, it's fine.
There were a few things he would say where I felt a little uncomfortable about the kind of conversations we'd be having about game characters.
Okay.
My thing with Girls of Gaming was like if people want to like that, I'm totally fine with it.
Sure.
There was a market for it. If you're into that, I'm not going to shame anybody who's into those magazines. But I guess the one thing where it got kind of weird for me was when I was adding the nude content to the digital copies, because it like, and I don't even know if this is going to make sense, but if you got like really good artists to
Yeah.
make as classy as you can do it, right? If you like classier kind of, okay, these are risque picture. I mean, this is going to sound so dumb. Like, here's a risque picture of Jill Valentine and Claire Redfield from Resident Evil. Like,
Sure. Sure.
it's a weird concept, but I totally. There are a lot of artists out there who can do really good erotic artwork for like game characters and anime
I agree.
characters or whatever. If you had people doing that for the magazine, awesome.
Yeah.
I think there was a place for that and it would have made sense. But this wasn't that. This was like, okay, that render we've got of this character from the game that be in the instruction manual? Well, here's an alternate version of that render where for some reason they're just completely topless.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. And so it just felt like these aren't even real people, but it still felt exploitative of these characters,
Yeah.
And it was sometimes characters where it's like, I feel weird like having this character be naked in the magazine,
Yeah.
If it's like Laura or what that vampire girl from like Blood Rain
Blood
and
Rain,
things
yeah.
like okay, that makes sense to me. Or if you have,
Sure.
the succubus from like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, yeah, sure. But then you get just into some of these weird kind of characters where like you would never like if it was like Princess Peach, for example, like absolutely we never had Princess Peach in there. That never would have happened. But that kind of stuff. And he would commission, and this is kind of also where it felt weird, is he would commission artists to do adult artwork for some of these characters. And then he would be like, okay, make sure we don't actually say their name or the game they're from. Because if we say that, then we're going too far in the connection. And it's like, dude, Dave, everybody knows this is like, Jill Valentine naked, right? But we can't say Jill Valentine because, Capcom won't like that. Okay, but it literally is Jill Valentine if you look at it.
The offices again.
Yes. So that was kind of where it felt weird too to me. That kind of stuff.
Like he knew he was doing something weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like, totally copy this Louis Vuitton bag, but don't say Louis Vuitton anywhere.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Yeah. No, that I totally, because reading through at least the first couple issues, I definitely agree with you that like, I totally think that you can do, and I appreciated that about that, especially that first issue was like, okay, people, erotic artwork is often just written off as being kind of like, I don't know, just like sexual and all that.
Right.
Or it's kind of like considered like a cheap thing, but there's a lot of like artists that were in those books that I was like, oh, I really like their artwork. Like there's a Korean artist, Kim Hyung Tae, I think.
Yeah,
He's, like,
is he the Magna Carta?
Yes,
artist?
the Magna Carta guy.
Yeah.
He's and I love his artwork.
Yeah.
I think it's like really cool looking. And I see his stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, there's totally like, I don't know. That was weird. There's like the artistic merit, I feel like, and then here's like a render of Serena from Mortal Kombat,
right?
kind of thing. Which was like disappointing to me because some of it was kind of cool and like, oh, you never hear people talk about this kind of content like this, and other times where like, he wants to like salivate over Crystal from Star Fox Adventures kind of thing.
And look, I'm not saying that Dave started Girls at Gaming to, beef up any of his personal folders on his hard drive. I'm not saying that, but I'm also not saying that. So I don't know.
When you said he commissioned artists, I thought you were gonna say he wouldn't like. Let's not put this in the magazine.
Yeah.
Like,
Dave, didn't we spend like
did he just do it for
$5,000 on
himself?
art commissions this month? I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh,
Yeah, no, so that was like a really, really interesting. But for me, said it was there's like there was some great video at some point I saw about like a humor video by like the guy who makes all the covers for porn videos, and how literally to him it's just like a job. That's all it was. That's kind of what it was to me. Is like, okay, here's this whole folder of like naked character renders, and okay, how am I gonna put this on the page? Where am I gonna put this? What size do I make it? Where do I put the text? Like that's what it was for me. So it was weird, but also I was in a way detached from some of it, just because my concern was, how do I lay these pages out to make them look acceptable at least?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I was very curious about Girls of Gaming, but I also wanted to ask you about actually working at Play, and I guess specifically, so at for the website, was it kind of just more of the same that you've done before?
It was. And real quick before we get off Girls of Gaming, because I that was the point. Wait, I don't know if you would have noticed this or not. You might have. There was a point where Dave gets really into 3D. Did you come across any of that stuff?
Like 3D renders type stuff?
Like blue and red 3D. Like where you need 3D glasses to look at the image.
Oh, no, I don't think I did.
Yeah, so I don't know if you would have seen this, because there's a certain point where and I'm literally talking about like the kind of 3D they used back in the 1970s for movies, like the red and the blue image. Yeah. That Dave gets really into 3D. So there's sorry. There's like an issue or two of Girls of Gaming where we put like 3D content into the magazine, and then we actually put some 3D content into Play as well. And to the point where we included 3D glasses in the issue that were like sponsored by a company. And so we had a few ads in the magazine that were in 3D. It was really, really weird to go back and look at now. That just all of a sudden they'd be like, let's put like more of this blue and red 3D content. That's what's going to sell issues. But there's a couple issues where you can look at like 3D boobs, So. But okay, so website was really funny because when I came in, they had just paid a company to completely remake the site, and in the first week of my looking at it, like I've done a lot of web design and I really like web design, but I hadn't gotten super into like the PHP side of it, the actual like coding and the stuff. My knowledge is more like the design of side of it, not the actual code stuff. But even at that point, I come in and the first week I'm like, this site is like halfway done, and it's supposedly all the way done. And things are broken, things are not working. I don't know how much they had paid, but they had paid like thousands of dollars to this company to make this site, and it was trash. And so I come in to work on Play Online to run it. But then I also, right from the beginning, have to start rebuilding the site again and fixing stuff. And what was kind of funny was awesome for me, but doesn't make any sense for a business, was Dave at that point, kind of going back to Game Fan, didn't care. He's like, just as long as the site is running and we're putting stuff up, do whatever. And so I would literally sit there and just myself decide how things are going to change visually on the site and how the design is going to change and how I'm going to upgrade things and stuff like that. And so I just did that, and I just kind of ran with it. And I never asked him. Like I never said, "Hey, Dave, I want to change the design of the site." I just did it. It was kind of one of those better to ask for forgiveness and permission kind of things.
Yeah.
So I just did that, and then I was running that, and it was never like super, super huge, but it wasn't going badly. And it I enjoyed it a lot more than Game Fan just because it was in an era where it was easier to understand kind of what to do with the site, and the support you were getting from companies was a lot better. And there was actually, instead of the Game Fan side where it was like, we can't put anything for the magazine up because it's going to cannibalize sales. With Play, it was very much, once an issue's hit and it's been out for like a week or so, then we can start putting those articles up online to have more content to fill it out with. So I had a lot of fun with the site just because I was spending a lot of time adding new features and new design things and stuff. But it was never like a super, super huge site, so I could get away with that kind of stuff.
So it was just you then?
It was just me. Supposedly, it was always the case where the writers from the magazine were supposed to be helping out. That never happened. But so it goes along for a while. Near the end, I finally got a few kind of writers to come in and help me, and then somebody took over the site because I wanted to do more mag stuff. But there's a point where I completely overhaul the site with a new design and some actually pretty cool features that like no other sites had at the time. And at that point, Dave wants to launch this new idea, and I'm trying to think how to explain it. It was basically like we would have this section where you went in, and it would kind of be like an idiot's guide to gaming, where it's like, okay, I wanna know about like family games or like shooters, but I don't know much about them. And so the idea was you would go into this section, and somebody would run that section and kind of feature different things and kind of a more like a site within a site in a way. Like if you cared about like RPGs, and this would be the RPG site inside of the Play site. But that never went anywhere. And because just people who were supposed to be for the mag, who were supposed to be working on it with me, didn't do anything in it. But what I'm leading up to is one of, I think, the most amazingly stupid things a video game website has ever done. We did.
Okay.
At that part of Play Online. So this was in the era where it was starting to be conversations about like, what are review scores, right? Is like, do reviews need scores? If they do have scores, what kind of scores are they going to have? And so there's this argument among staff of like, what do we do, right? Do we get rid of scores completely? Do we keep the scores we had? I don't even remember at this point what the scoring system was. I think it was 1 to 10 with like points for everything, like 8.9 or whatever. I don't remember. But it gets decided, and so to this day, it's amazing that we did this because this was so dumb. It's decided that on the website, what if every editor could just make their own scoring system?
Oh no.
So for every review on that site, the scores were different.
Oh no.
So Dave, I think, went back to like the 1 to 100 from Game Fan. I can't remember if Heather was like 5 stars or something like that. I was like, if you know anything about Japanese gaming, like the kind of Japanese scoring system is like EDCBASSS kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, screw it. That's going to be my scoring system. Somebody else had like 1 to 10. Somebody else was like letter, like A+, B- kind of stuff.
God.
It was the stupidest thing you could ever do for a video game review website, but we did it.
Was there at least like was there at least like an explanation of what the score thing was?
So every review had to then have, here's how this editor scores games, kind of like block on it.
Okay.
And this was especially like, I don't remember how big Metacritic was at that point, but like you would never do this now because everybody
totally
wants to
screw it up.
Yes. And I think it lasted for like was it like a month and a half or like 2 months until until we're just like, oh my God, this was a disaster. So I think past that might have been the point where the magazine dropped scores completely, because there was a point where we get to where it's kind of the last word, little box of text, but there's actually no score. And Dave
Okay.
hated that because Dave loved scores.
He likes the
But
number.
yeah, I had to mention that because it was one of the most colossally, amazingly stupid things I've not only ever seen on a video game website, but I've actually been a part of.
Was there a reader reaction?
No, because at that point, that was before we actually started having. I think it was before we started having comments on articles.
Oh, okay.
So there wasn't really much feedback that we were getting other than the forums, and I think people just found it just weirdly funny that we were doing that. So
It is funny. It is like,
it is, and I mean, as an editor, like the first thought is this is awesome because now I can just review games the way I want to review them, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
score them the way I want to score them, because I hated, like I've always hated like the 1 to 100 or the like 8.7 or 3.5 or 7.2 kind of stuff. Because I think when you get so many numbers as a possibility, like that score becomes meaningless. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
what is the difference between a 7.2 and a 7.4 as a game, right? Like you can't tell me an answer to that.
yeah.
So I was loving the fact that I could have my own scoring system, but it's it's like the, you know, you're drunk the night before and you have the fling with somebody, and in the morning you wake up and then it starts to slowly dawn on you what you've done, you know? It was kind of that slow, like, wait, what did we do? And what are we doing on our site? That is supposed to be this professional video game website. So
Did you prefer not having a score at all?
I preferred it in terms of when you're reviewing games, they're like the score does get weird.
Yeah.
Just because there are times when it's like, okay, is this a 7 or an 8? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and if I say it's a 7, is that too low? I say if it's 8, is it too high? It is kind of nice thinking that people will just read your entire review to get your opinion, but that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So you do have to have scores of some site.
Yeah. I don't. I make videos about like specific games sometimes, and I don't necessarily think of them as like reviews. They sort of are, but I don't like doing scores because some games I find just impossible to score.
Yeah.
Have you ever played I Divine Cybermancy?
I don't think I have.
Okay, have you heard of it?
I don't know if I have actually. What platform? What's it for?
It's a PC game.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
made by
no.
this French developer based off a tabletop game that they made up that's never been made public.
Huh.
It's made in the Source engine, and it's like one of the craziest things I've ever played in my entire life. It's like a weird, completely bloated, insane immersive sim. I made like an hour-long video about it, and I don't even know how, if I could say that it's good or bad. I know I don't like it, but it's like, how would I put a review score on this? There's way too much to go into. Like my final, yeah, like you said, like the final word, like that's the best that I could give for something like that.
Well, I think you get in situations. I think a perfect example for me is there's a game called Rule of Rose on PlayStation
Yes.
2.
Yes.
It's this really weird Japanese horror game, and as a game, it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
The combat is some of the worst you will ever have in a survival horror game. It's really, really bad. But there's also something just so wonderful and beautiful and interesting about that game.
Oh yeah.
And I think for me, like, if I write a review, and I don't remember what I gave it, I think I might have given it a 7, which was probably too high. But logically, you'd be like, okay, this game's like a 5 or something, right? But if you do that, and somebody just looks at it and sees 5, they're gonna like instantly write it off.
Yeah.
But you want to say like, okay, here's all 100 reasons you should not play this game. And then here's the reason you should ignore all of that and still play it. You know,
Yeah.
there's games that I've played where that's the experience you find, and you want to be honest about the game's faults, but you also want to tell people why there's still something unique and special there. And I think that when you add that score on, if you are being honest about reviewing it, you have to give it, a certain score that maybe it does deserve, but that would also instantly write it off for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's you have to like play a game with the audience.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, did you ever play Illbleed on the
I
Dreamcast?
I that's one of my regrets in terms of selling games, because I
Yeah.
used to have that, and it was a weirdly wonderful game. And then I
Yeah.
sold it, and now it's like $1,000 to get your copy again.
Yeah. I made a video on it, also like an hour long. And I played it, and I remember writing the script and getting through so much of making that video and being like, this game is not good. I don't I've like, on this fundamental level, I don't like it. And by the end of it, and especially like a week after the video was out, I was like, I kind of love Illbleed.
Yeah, yeah.
How would I? That's exactly what I would give that like Rule of Rose 7 to.
But see, to me, like those are some of the most interesting games out there, right?
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
a
Yeah.
game to come out where like, this is good. I know it's gonna be good. Of course, it's good. It's good. Or like, this game's just trash. But those games that
Yeah.
like are in a weird place where you hate it but you love it, but it's terrible but it's great. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of some of the most interesting stuff you can find, and that's kind of what I enjoyed about Game Fan versus some other magazines, was that we, and then Play, of course, was that we gave a chance to those kind of games. Another good example would be like The Wizard of Oz on DS.
Hmm.
Like that's a game that's so easy to write off if you just look at it, because it's an it's a Japanese RPG based on The Wizard of Oz, where all your movement is done via a virtual rollerball on the touchscreen.
Okay.
Like that sounds like the stupidest idea you could have,
Yeah.
But it was so neat and unique and enjoyable and fun, even with its flaws. So like those are the kind of games that I just love digging into, and like I've loved helping other people kind of find and connect with.
Oh yeah. If I see like a 6 out of 10 score, I get really excited. Like an average score, I get really excited because I'm like, oh, some people really like this and some people really don't like this.
Yeah.
And that's the most interesting.
Yeah.
So when you were back to Play, I guess, was Play run like Game Fan? How similar was it?
No, it was definitely much more like a business.
Okay.
Mostly. So, and being totally honest, like for 95% of my time at Play, like I got a paycheck every 2 weeks and never had to think about it,
Okay.
And we had somebody named Brady Fichter, who was running it, and he was a really cool guy. And he actually went over and he helped Steve Harris relaunch EGM when that happened. And yeah, it went mostly well, and this is something that you touched upon in one of the conversations, it might have been with Greg, was that Dave had this habit of, when he had to put big boy pants on and do things that were tough,
Mm-hmm.
is that he would suddenly just kind of vanish, and his wife Julie would handle it.
Yeah.
And that part I didn't necessarily like, but also I got along pretty well with Julie at that point, so I would talk to her about things anyway. But when Play shuts down in the ugly way it does, like that's kind of what set me off for my second time of being mad at Dave. But for most of my time there, it went pretty well, And so this is what's really funny too, is so for anybody who knows, in Agoura Hills, California, there's I think it's Canaan Road, Kanon Road. I think is the street it is. There's like an intersection there. If you're going along the 101 west, you're coming out of the San Fernando Valley from Los Angeles and going west through Calabasas and stuff. There's that intersection is where back in the day the Game Fan offices were. And then years later, right across the street is where the Play offices were.
Oh.
And then a few years later, right across the street is where the final EGM offices were. So it's weird that 3 times in a row I've gone back to that exact same intersection in Southern California to do work. But like so we had an office, but like most of the time we weren't in the office. It was just a small little office where a couple people who had to be there for like office stuff were there. But for most of us writers, we just do stuff from home. And if we needed to have a meeting or do something, we'd go into the office, but otherwise we worked from home. So it was a very different experience from Game Fan. It usually felt more professional. Said pay was coming in when expected, and you weren't going in the office. And if you did go in the office, it felt like a actual real office where you could bring companies to talk to them if you had to talk to them. Because it was always really embarrassing at Game Fan to a point where there was actually a meeting we had where it's like, okay, we have to clean these offices up because we've got companies coming in to see us, and we can't have them see us in this way.
That's. Oh man.
Yeah.
So were I guess like the scheduling problems fixed by that point, because there was that issue of like Dave gets the games, he hangs on to them for 2 weeks, and then he distributes them, and everyone has to crunch.
He was a lot better about because he let Brady kind of control some things, and he was definitely like claim certain games, but he was better about not taking everything. And it wasn't like we didn't have the problem of, okay, it's deadline, we're all waiting for Dave, and we've all got to be around for Dave. It was like if Dave's late, Dave's late. And then Brady had to deal with it, right? But like for the rest of us, if our stuff was done, the stress was gone. And one of the kind of things that I did like in that era, and something I'll give Dave credit for, was when I came back to work for him at Play. At that point, he really had a lot more respect for my work and appreciated better the stuff I could do. And so I got to have a lot more freedom in what I picked. So there were still, obviously, we want to cover this certain game, somebody needs to do it. But there's also the option of like, you know, for example, I would do a lot of the handheld stuff because people in the office mostly didn't care about PlayStation Portable or DS at that point. So I literally would just pick the games we would put into the issue for those 2 platforms. So there was also more of us deciding what we would do, which also helped in terms of getting things done. Because then if I know I've got 2 pages or 3 pages of PSP and DS stuff to fill, I can just get it done and then do it. So it was a lot better in that regard in terms of not having to wait for Dave and not having to wait till the last second for him to let go of games that he was still expecting he could do.
Do you think he matured over time?
I do. In not in all the ways that he needed to, but he was definitely a lot more of a boss at that point. I mean, okay, no, I'm not gonna say boss, I'll say leader. He was more of a leader. Like he understood better about kind of encouraging people and getting them to do what they needed to do and recognizing people's talents. Because a Game Fan, it really did feel like if you weren't in his little circle of the people that he hung out with and really liked, that he just didn't care about your existence. Whereas at Play, he kind of seemed to appreciate everybody who was working for him. He wasn't always great at it, great at showing it, and then he did still do things that were just ridiculous that he shouldn't have done. But I think he was better about, because sometimes Game Fan could feel like it was the Dave Halverson show,
Mm-hmm.
like he was such a big presence in that magazine and so much stuff was his. And when I came into Game Fan, for example, like he completely decided my character. I the only choice I got in my character was the name, and that was because I actually unknowingly got between him and the person who was asking me and got to get my name in there.
Oh.
So he had a name picked out for me and he had the design picked out for me. So he picked people's characters. He would pick a lot of the games that we covered. There were times when he would write reviews under my name just because he needed another review for a game and he wanted it to be his opinion on the game. So he would just randomly pick people on staff to write under. So he did a lot of like
that was crazy,
not cool things like that during Game Fan, and that stuff was like not around for Play.
That's crazy.
He wouldn't like write anything and put it as your credit. He would still pick some of the games. He would say, hey, I need somebody to cover this. He would still have his personality there. But I think he did get a lot better about not just making it all his decisions. It absolutely was still at times, and I want to be careful about not having people think that he wasn't controlling at times. He still was. But he was much better than a Game Fan in terms of like letting people do more on their own.
Okay. Well, where did the Shidoshi name come from?
So that was, that was way before, and I had gotten into. Do you know what a BBS is?
A bulletin board service.
Yeah. Okay. So for anybody who doesn't, before the internet really existed as a thing that most of the public could get onto, there were these things called BBSs, bulletin board systems, where they were more like local kind of small, tiny internets that you would call up somebody's computer and then you would log into their site and then you would leave posts and stuff, and then other people could call in and do the same thing. It was like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of little mini internets around the United States. And I had logged into my brother had brought home a computer that had a modem in it, and I had never used a modem before. And so I learned about the VBS things, and I called one up, and they said like, "Okay, what's your handle?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've never had a handle," because it's unthinkable now that you wouldn't have a handle or an ID or a nickname in some regard, right? Because there's so many things internet-wise that you're going to use it somewhere, whether it's your Twitter handle or your online gamer tag or whatever. But back then, like you didn't have something like that, and so I had to think of a name, and I was in my full-on weeaboo phase of loving Japanese stuff and wanting to use Japanese words wherever I could, and I picked a Japanese word and then misspelled it. And then I put Shidoshi, and that was my nickname. And so I'd had that for a long time. I had used that kind of as like my online pen name and stuff like that. And so most of the work I had done writing wise at that point was under that name. Mm-hmm. Because it was, most of my stuff was either fanzines or whatever early online stuff there was. And I got to Game Fan and said, unbeknownst to me, Dave was making my character without any input whatsoever from me.
Yeah.
And
which was weird, because when I talked to Terry, he said that at least the first like kind of wave or two of hires, he directly worked with them to make their characters.
Right. Well, so
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because Dave didn't like me at that point. But and it's funny because Terry later on apologized to me for that character. He's like, "Yeah,
Yes, I remember
I
that.
know, I'm sorry." Like, yeah, I know. I thought I know it wasn't you, but so Dave wanted me to be this kind of wacky scientist character, and he was going to give me the name Egbert was the
Okay.
character's name because
Okay.
egg, like an egghead kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Greg Rao, the issue's getting near closing, and I don't know if either he knew Dave had a name for me, or he didn't know Dave had a name for me, or he saw Egbert and thought it was just like something to put there temporarily. But Greg Rao comes to me and he's like, "Hey, what do you want your name to be?" And I'm like, "Well, for years and years, I've written things as a name Shidoshi, so I'd like to use that." And he's like, "Sure, no problem." And he puts it in, and then Dave got mad about that because he had come up with this whole entire character that I was supposed to portray, and then I had ruined it. So
But you kept the name. They let you
yeah,
keep Shidoshi.
yeah, and I got to keep it, and because I mean it was in that issue in print, so they couldn't. I mean they could have, but by that point
Yeah.
he lost. So
So, what was the end of play like?
so it I excuse me. I I'm not sure I knew that it was coming, and I Brady, the kind of editor in chief or managing editor, I don't remember his exact title, but he knew, but he hadn't really told anybody. So this would have been 2009, and I go on vacation for Christmas because the way it worked was, since most of the industry shut down anyway around Christmas time, is we would always have the week of Christmas off and the week of New Year's off. And so I flew back home, and I'm there just kind of relaxing for Christmas. And I get a call from Julie, Dave's wife, and she's like, "Hey, I need you to update the site with some stuff." And I'm like, "Well, Julie, I'm on vacation. I'm back home. I'm staying with my mom. She doesn't really have a computer meant to like do a lot of like online work and stuff." I'm like, "What do you need?" And she's like, "Well, I need just to refresh some of the products that we're selling and stuff." So I do that begrudgingly, and then I go back to California after New Year's, and I'm doing work and just doing the same thing as always. I'm updating the website and whatever, and I'm expecting at some point we're gonna start working on the magazine again. And it gets to be about January 15th, and I'm having a conversation with her about work stuff, and then something comes up where it's like, "Hey, we need to work something out for you." And I'm like, what's the problem?" And she's like, "Oh, well, uh you were fired on Christmas Day." And I'm like,
Whoa.
"What are you talking about?" And she's like,
What?
"Yeah, everybody was let go on Christmas Day." Like, and it's like, "Julie, it's like January 15th. What are you talking about?" And so like all of a sudden we find out that for like 2.5 to 3 weeks we've thought we've had a job when we didn't have a job. And that was
Had you
literally
gotten
how
your
play ended.
Had you gotten your paycheck?
No. That
You
that was
just
the
thought it
one
was
that was the
late?
one thing. So I think what it was like, I think the one before Christmas was late, and then the one after that was late, but it was, and I should have known, but it was the kind of situation where for what was it, like three or 4 years, like paychecks had always been on time. And
Yeah.
so I thought, okay, maybe something about the holidays had screwed up the pay system, right? Because that's happened other times too with companies. It's like where something with the holidays just got the pay schedule screwed up. But so in talking to her about where the paycheck was and stuff like that, yeah, she's like, "Oh yeah, we fired everybody on Christmas Day."
Whoa.
And it's like, "That's awesome. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for
Jeez.
telling me in the middle of January that we're all let go." But yeah, so it's with both Game Fan and Play, it was kind of like the not with a roar but a whimper kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was just going, going, and then all of a sudden it's gone. And I, you know, I had loved Game Fan so much, and it broke my heart when it died, and I hated it when it died. But I was also in a place where I wasn't completely bummed that it had died, because Game Fan had kind of become something I wasn't always completely happy with, and the company was having troubles anyway and stuff. So it wasn't a surprise, but Play came as a surprise, and I think in those final days that to me Play had really felt the closest we ever got to a return to Game Fan, because on staff you had Dave, you had Nick, you had Casey, Mike Hobbs, you had myself. So there was at least 5 like ex Game Fan people. You had people like Heather Ann Campbell, who I thought she would have completely been a Game Fan person if she had been around back in the day writing, because she had that kind of personality and love for games and stuff. You had Greg Orlando, and you had some really great talent. You had a passion. I'm sorry. You had a passion for what we were doing. I think it kind of came out in our writing. So it was the closest I think we ever got to having Game Fan back. And I loved what we were doing at Play. And to have it die just so suddenly without warning, like, really crushed me.
So there was no writing on the wall kind of thing?
No, I say other than the fact that like 2 checks had issues, that was the only thing that I knew personally. Otherwise,
Wow.
there was just no sign that we were in trouble.
Wow. So I guess they must have been having some sort of money issues at that point.
Yeah, and I don't know the exacts, and I know you were wondering this, but my understanding has always been that, what was it? I don't remember the company name. I'm spacing it out. The company,
The publisher?
the publisher, yeah, for
Was it
Play.
Fusion?
Okay, Fusion, yeah. My understanding has always been that Fusion was a company that Dave and Julie owned. Because I think because I
Yeah.
went to some of the bankruptcy hearings, and my understanding is that Fusion was under Julie's name. So
Okay.
that anything that Dave then did for Game Fan, the new Game Fan, would be separate from the Play bankruptcy that
Yeah.
basically Julie was going. That was my understanding, and I could be wrong.
Okay. Yeah, I do remember it now, trying to find, because I looked into Metropolis, and
Right.
I tried to leave no stone unturned, and I just could not find anything about what was up with Fusion Publishing
Yeah.
or anything else they did or who owned it. All I could find was some records of some bankruptcy filings, but it was very vague. So
Yeah, and I've got the paperwork, I think, here somewhere. But I think I don't know the Games Republic situation because I wasn't there. But I think so. Fusion should have been Play, and then I think Paper Planet was what he did it under the new Game Fan. So I think those were kind of like just their own companies, because from my knowledge, like, I always dealt with Dave and Julie. There was never like anybody else that I ever dealt with or knew of being higher than them or in the mix. So
okay. Huh. Do you did you ever see the 3-foot tall Sonic and Tails statue?
I did. I remember the Sonic being there. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know where it is?
I have to assume at his house.
Okay.
So like man, I don't know if I should tell this story or not.
I can cut anything out that you
Well,
want me to.
no, I'm just saying this is like I don't think that me and Dave are ever going to be on good terms again. And I don't think he's ever going to be making a magazine that I'd be wanting to work at. So when Dave leaves Game Fan, he had like, when you would first go in the office, he had like, there was a big office like I'm sorry, when you go in the office building that the part we had, there was a big kind of glassed in office, and that was his office, and you had to go past his office to get anywhere else in the R section of the building. And the thing that you'd always notice is that his room was just full of stuff, like games and CDs and collectibles and all this kind of stuff. And it was always like that was like dad's room, dad's like man's cave, that you always wanted to go in and play with his stuff, but you weren't allowed to, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes you'd go into when you're talking to him, you'd kind of just like look around and be like, what's he got over there? Like what's he got on these shelves? And he just had tons and tons of stuff in there. And when he leaves, because he left and he was still working for the magazine for a bit while he was kind of trying to get the plans for Games Republic going. So he leaves and his office is locked and he's just not around. And at first, a lot of us don't know why. It's just that Dave's gone. So Dave's gone for 1 day, Dave's gone for 2 days, Dave's gone for 3 days, and we kind of start to realize he's not coming back, right? And then it's like, okay, well, he's got to at some point come back for his stuff. And then the conversations about Games Republic start happening. And he's still like, his office is still there, and he's taken the stuff that he cared about, but there's still tons and tons of stuff in his office. And part of why this happens is because at various times it would become known to us that Dave and Jay, I think Jay was part of this. They would just flat out like steal things that we were supposed to get. Because there was one point specifically I remember where Sony sent over copies of the original Crash Bandicoot on PlayStation. They sent over a copy for every single person on staff. And none of us ever got those copies. And we found out that, from my understanding, is that Dave and Jay had kept them and give them out as gifts to other people, like their kids or their friends' kids and things like that.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, so leading up to this, like, there was some animosity of knowing that, like, across the years, either our paycheck has been spent on Sonic statues or our games have been taken and stuff like that. So at some point, and I won't name who it is, but I'm pretty sure I remember who it was, because there definitely would have been this one certain person. It's mentioned like, hey, I think if I crawl through the ceiling, I can get into Dave's office and we can unlock the door.
Okay.
So he goes up through the ceiling, comes back down, unlocks the door.
It's like Metal Gear Solid.
and so this is like at night on I know it's like a deadline or just like a regular kind of work week. This is like 7:00 at night. And so a handful of us go into Dave's office and we're kind of just looking around, and like, man, he's got a lot of stuff in here. And we just look though, and we close the office door. We don't lock it again. We close it and leave. The next night, we're all kind of hanging out there. We go back in his office and we're all kind of looking around. And we all give each other this certain look. And nothing is said, but each of us just kind of takes one thing off the shelf that we had our eye on, walk out of the office, close it, and kind of leave. We wait a few days to see if Dave's coming back. Dave doesn't come back. Nobody says anything. Nobody notices anything missing. So we go back in his office, and this time we take a few more things. Maybe a couple games here, a couple game CD soundtracks there, So, like, a week and a half later, his office is just completely ransacked. Just tons and tons of things are missing out of his office, but nobody will admit to anything. Nobody will say what they have or what they might have at home now. So yeah, there was just that kind of like, but said it was a lot of pent up frustration from knowing how many paychecks we'd lost, the kind of comments he'd made, about maybe Bonafire and things like that, and the gifts we were supposed to have gotten from companies that we never got. So in terms of like the Sonic statue and stuff like that, like we did end up having a chance for a little bit of retaliation, but.
So then you don't want to say if you still have anything from that that raid?
No, and I won't say that I might have like a Neo Geo home arcade board or anything like that, or certain things.
Oh, good thing you don't have that then.
Yeah, good thing I don't have that.
Yeah. So, what did you end up doing after play? I mean, that sounds like a stressful situation to get booted out on.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out like what to do. Like it was kind of one of those things where like I just don't know if I want to get back into gaming again or not. And while I was trying to find out, so Brady, who had been running play, he goes and meets up with Steve Harris, who Steve Harris was the guy who started Electron Game Monthly back in the day. And EGM had died under Ziff Davis, and Steve was thinking about relaunching it. And so Brady goes and helps them do the relaunch, but Steve's not really happy with the staff, and so they're getting ready to kind of get rid of a lot of staff that they had on and bring in new people and take it in a kind of different direction. And Brady comes to me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do EGM?" And so I go and meet with Steve at E3, talk to him and show him some of my stuff, my writing, my layout stuff, and then I end up getting a job at EGM. So I had kind of like was said in that in between of like, do I still want to do games or do I want to just get out of this and not have any more to do with it? But then I got the job. So I went to EGM and I've been there ever since.
Oh, you're still at EGM.
Yeah. We are not doing EGM anymore. Unfortunately, the magazine died. But during the time of us doing EGM, we also started up a magazine called Walmart Game Center, which basically, if you go into Walmart's, in the game section, there's a free magazine that you can take, and we made that magazine as well. Oh. And whereas we were in a position where EGM in what it was just wasn't feasible financially because it was a more traditional kind of magazine and the advertising just wasn't there for that. On the other side, when you've got a magazine that you're giving away for free, that's directly focused to a place where you're buying games and you can kind of promote the games that are being sold. That was a lot easier to keep going in terms of like the advertising and stuff like that. And
okay,
it's definitely miles apart from what EGM was and what GameFan was and everything. But for all the kind of thoughts you have about what a magazine made for a retailer would be, we actually get a lot of freedom in what we put in the issues. Outside of a few things like, don't go girls gaming on it, don't show graphically violent Mortal Kombat fatalities or things like that. Beyond that, we've had a chance to really still do some really fun and interesting stuff in the magazines, and it's given me a chance to still do reviews and previews and things like that. So it's been nice to have that outlet for still doing something in print, and still have that out there. Yeah. In a world where print's just so hard to still do.
I didn't even know about that. Yeah. I don't think I've been in a Walmart in years.
Yeah, I know it. But I've had people say to me like, "Oh my God, like I didn't know magazines still existed. And I found yours and it was free and it was awesome to still get it." I had people, write to me and say like, "Hey, my kid loves getting your issues because you have like posters and things like that." So it's one of those situations where if you're talking about kind of the more like mainstream game media, like we're on the outside of that, but there's still a place for it. And it's still kind of nice to say, if you just want to pick up a magazine and read one, you can go to a Walmart and there's a free copy laying there for you.
That's cool. I'll pick one up
the
next time I'm there for whatever reason.
We do that and we do other stuff too. We got some plans I can't talk about yet, but we've got other things that we're working on. We have a website that still has some stuff going on it. It's not as much as we used to do, but there's still stuff there. So we keep busy, and it's a steady paycheck, which is nice. And so
nice. And you're also a podcaster.
Yeah, I've done podcasts. I started back in like 2001 or so.
Whoa.
It's very off and on. Like I'm kind of like where you're at with the YouTube stuff. is I don't fit to a schedule. It's like whenever I've got free time and things I want to talk about, we'll do podcasts.
That's cool. I have to thank you for being very open about doing interviews um, in the past. Why have you been so outspoken about kind of your involvement with this whole
I
story?
think it's just because like it was there were so many weird things going on at Game Fan that a lot of people have been interested in it, and I just think it's fun to talk about. I'm one of those kind of people who love to hear like the behind the scenes stories on stuff.
Oh yeah.
And it does get weird, and you touch on this a little bit just because of like, let's say Dave, right? It's it's a kind of a weird territory talk about a person when they're not there to like kind of answer what you're talking about them,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of there was a lot of negative at Game Fan, and I've definitely spoken about some of that publicly, but there's also a lot of fun there too, and I think it's easy to get into the negative side of it, and that gets into some weird territory, and I don't necessarily want to dwell on some of that stuff, even though there are other things that we need to be truthful about, like what happened there, like the pay and the hours and stuff. But it was a really interesting place and a really interesting time. And I think one of the hard things to fully appreciate now is back then there was no YouTube. There were no podcasts. There were almost no personal websites. There weren't blogs, any of that kind of stuff. There were these very few chances to get your voice out there if you wanted your voice to get out there. And so when I got hired at GameFan, it was literally like a once in a lifetime kind of chance for me, because there were so many people who would have wanted to be there that couldn't. And so it was an amazing opportunity. It was a dream come true. And so as many things as went wrong there, it was also such a magical experience on the other side of that. And so I've always loved just talking about that in terms of letting people know what happened and what the truth of it was. Not I don't want to be one of those people who acts like that was the highlight of my life and that's all that I've been. And then and kind of still tells the stories later because there's nothing else going on. Like I love my life. I've done a lot of things at this point. I've had a lot of amazing experiences. I've got a great family. I do my own stuff now, so I've got a lot of other facets to me. But that was a really amazing time, and it was an amazing magazine, and I think people are curious about it. So I've always been happy to kind of talk about my side of that. But there's a lot of stories that go on, and that's why if you look up things like the big thread from TNL where all the ex-Game Fan people went in there and gave their sides too, like there's so many interesting stories. And I keep thinking like one day I need to like try to get people together and make a book out of it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly why I made the documentary in the first place.
Yeah. And that was interesting for me too, right? Is because I think it's easy for me to think that the people interested in Game Fan are the people who were around reading it at the time. Mm-hmm. Because if you were around for it, it was such an interesting, fascinating magazine, and there were so many crazy stories from it. But to see someone like you discover it and then find it interesting has been fun, because now there's like this new generation of people who can discover it and hear all this for the first time and be like, are you serious? Right? Yeah. Like, especially now, like I think, we're still not great in terms of work culture, but we're better than we used to be. And so to hear about some of the things that went on and be like, are you this can't be real. Like, this can't have been a real thing that happened, but it did happen. And so it's fun to get the chance to have new people discover those kind of stories too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of the comments you read on the series, but one of my I think I got this a few times, and also just from talking to people, was they would say it made them nostalgic for a magazine they never read.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Like, that was I was very happy with that that kind of feedback, because I think the way, the level of depth that you guys told, like retold those stories in, and the real like character and personality that all of those magazines had was I don't know, it really was something kind of special. uh and I find it interesting. I mean, I a lot of my channel is about like the weird little side stories and things that like no one has ever heard of before.
Hmm.
And so it was right in line. I love stories like this, and it's why I find it um all the whole game fan saga so interesting.
Well, and this is no disrespect to your video at all, but like, I mean, so how long was the compilation video that you did on GameFan? Was it like 2.5 hours or?
The whole thing was about 2.5 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and and I mean, there was still so much that you didn't even cover, you know, and so
I
that's the funny part about that is there's so many other stories, even the play era too. There's so many other things that happened, so much craziness around Dave and around the magazines and around the people. Period. There's so many other things that went on that if you want to like, I'm really big into like these like kind of rabbit hole videos or like the iceberg stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so if you want to go down to an insane rabbit hole, like there's so many things you can find out about when on the Game Fan, and that's just one magazine. That's just one example of games media, and
Yeah.
crazy stuff happened at other places too.
The stuff that was in my series was basically as much as I could possibly find. So the stuff that I didn't include was things that I wouldn't have had any way of knowing,
Right. Yeah.
unless I literally just tracked down all of you people
Yeah.
and interviewed you for hours.
Yeah. There's tons of stories that you could tell, but it's just like a lot of it's out there, or a lot of it's just like smaller stuff that, you know, if you weren't around, maybe you wouldn't appreciate as much. But said it was Game Fan was awesome and terrible at the same time, and it was I would never not have done it. You know, I would never change things. Like I'm really glad I worked there. I'm really glad it happened. I'm glad I got to be part of that, and it'll always be something special to me. But it was also a completely awful situation to have been in, especially for people who were as young as we were. So I know they said like Nick and Andrew and them were certainly like 15 and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
and it was just a completely bad environment. You know, but it was also a fun time. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for coming on and agreeing to do this. This has been really fun. It's
Yeah,
the
thanks for
longest
having me.
one
So like
we've-
I got past. So I have a friend who's also friends with Terry, and I got your video. So I think Greg sent Terry your video, I think, and then Terry sent my friend your video, and then my friend sent me the video. He's like, yeah, Terry found this crazy video about Game Fan, and I'm like, hmm. And so I've been doing a lot of work lately where I need to have something on kind of in the background. But I ended up like intently watching the whole entire thing for the full 2.5 hours. And so it was really fun. It's like that. It's fun to see somebody who wasn't around for it, like kind of discover it. And also I didn't know that you had found it through Girls of Gaming, so I watched that video later. And then
Oh yeah, that's how I.
and it was like,
Yeah,
oh my
weird
god,
way to find
your first encounter with us was Girls of Gaming. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
That was God. I remember looking it up because I want to do a video about like a weird gaming magazine or something, and I find Girls of Gaming, and I'm like, oh, this should be weird at least. And I look up, who's this Dave Halverson guy, and I just see on the Wikipedia article, like first 5 minutes of research, like very controversial person in the game journalist scene, and it had like 8 citations behind it. I was like, oh, okay, there's like a story here.
yeah, and like, yeah, and like I just remember too, like when he made me post like the like the Golden Axe Beast Rider missive about how
Yeah.
the industry was wrong about that game and how yeah, and just all that kind of stuff.
That was his
Um,
own personal Gamergate.
yeah, he's a well, and said the thing too, as my kind of final comment about all this is the thing too
Sure.
is that as ridiculous and idiotic as some of his opinions are on games, and as I mean, literally, I before I worked at Game Fan, there were some games that I bought because of his recommendations, where I bought them and I'm like, oh my god, this is just garbage. You know, how does anybody say this game is something you should buy? Like as terrible as some of his opinions have been on games, the thing is there's other people in the media where I'll say they had this opinion because they were just trying to get clicks, right? Or they had this
Hmm.
opinion because they just didn't give the game a chance, or they personally just don't like this kind of game, or you know they're a fanboy or whatever. The thing with Dave is as completely psychotic as some of his opinions on stuff are, I think it almost always comes from a genuine place. Like there's always a question of, you know, has this person been paid off to give this game a good review? Sonic '06, right? Like that's one of his most infamous reviews. Is like,
Yeah.
was he paid off to review that? And the answer is absolutely not. I do not think he was. I think everything he said he legitimately believed, right? And so
Yeah.
in his madness, there is honesty to it.
Yeah.
And on some level, I can respect that. As
Yeah.
much as I might not respect his opinions, I can respect how he got there. And whatever you say about Dave Halverson is like when he talks about games he loves, I think he genuinely loves them and he genuinely thinks there's something good about them. And as completely wrong as he might be, like he's not coming to that wrongness because of, you know, malice or ill
Yeah.
intent or anything. So
Yeah. No, I also, I mean, I got to that point where I was like, I think he just, I don't think he's paid off or anything. I
yeah,
think he just has no taste.
yes, right.
It's like,
Which on
and then,
some level you can kind of respect, you know.
yeah, I was like, that was so. I wanted to make that series, and I wanted people to be able to walk away from it without necessarily like two people could watch that and come away with very different interpretations of who he was. And I know that's hard, probably for you, like you to do, because you like know him.
Right.
And but you know, for like a third party, that was my intent because he did come off as such a interesting kind of like real complicated person, and I wanted to present that.
Well, and that's like, you know what, you know what's funny is I thought about like because in lead up to this interview, I thought about it and I was just like, would I ever work for Dave again? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
95% of me says absolutely not. You know, I would have to be desperate to work for him again. But the thing is, and I think even in looking at the things that are wrong with him as a person and the things that he's done that are legitimately bad, right? I think at the end of the day, like one of the things that's hard not to fall for is that, you know, if you've got that choice between there's either this job where I everything goes smoothly and I get paid on time, but there's no passion, there's no emotion, there's none of that, or this job where I'm working for Dave, where who knows if I'm getting all the money I'm supposed to be getting, and there's gonna be craziness, and Dave is Dave, but I'm working for somebody who, in his heart and soul, cares about what he's doing. There's something that's really compelling about that, right? You know,
Yeah.
is that's the easily the worst job to pick between the two. But sometimes it's hard to not say you'd rather have the job where that passion does exist there and you're working for somebody who has that passion that you share. Like, and that's been kind of the the good and the evil of Dave is that it's it's he's got a little bit of that Steve Jobness to him, you know. If you're around him, like it's hard not to fall under his spell and kind of believe the things he's telling you, even if they're crazy. So yeah, it's like that's one of the things about him is just that is like as terrible of a boss as he can be, and as ridiculous of a person and a reviewer and a game critic and a journalist as he can be, like there's something still attractive about working for somebody who has that much passion for what they're doing. So
Yeah, I can see it.
yeah,
um, I guess that's the note you'd like. If that's the note you'd like to end on, we can end there.
Sure.
Okay. Well, it's been awesome. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
If anyone who's watching or listening right now, be sure to pick up a copy of, what is it, the Walmart
Game Center magazine. Go into your local Walmart. If they don't have it, they'll have it at some point. But it's given out for free in the gaming section there. And if I can just give one quick plug for myself, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My home website is mollielpatterson.com, which I know is a long thing to type in. So if you do just type in mollipen.com, mollipen.com, that'll take you to my site. And anything you want to know about me is probably over there. I've got writing up there that is as recent as last month, back to like 1992. I'm trying to archive all my writing on there. I'm still got a long ways to go, but there's a lot of stuff on there. There's a lot of cool features I've done over the years. A lot of my reviews. I've done interviews with people like Hideo Kojima and Donald Mustard and Keiji Inafune and a bunch of other people. There's interviews of those up there. I've got links to my podcast and anything else I do and all my social medias. So if you're interested in any of my work at all and want to see some of that, you can go there.
Your podcast right now is called what again?
A generic video game podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, because we couldn't think of a name, so it's just a generic video game podcast. So anything that I've done mostly is linked from my main site, so you can find it from there.
Okay. So everyone can check that out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hit stop recording now.